On the radar with the CBS 17 Storm Team.
Welcome to On the Radar this week. You got meteorologist Ross Whitley here, as well as meteorologist Rachel Dunsing. And we have a fun-packed show. And I promise this week we're going to stay on time.
I make no such promise. No. But yeah, we have a lot of things to talk about. Of course, the big thing in the sky wasn't the snowflakes, although that happened too. The aurora. We once again were treated to our skies glowing. Maybe you had a chance to see it. We're going to explain a little bit more about that. It is also getting a little colder here in North Carolina, and that means, yes, some snow flurries, but also the deer are out and doing their thing, which means you have to be a little more careful on the road. So all of that. We're also going to talk about some winter weather folklore, one of our favorite topics, of course. And then hopefully, if we have time, we'll get to a little space history as well.
Yeah, might as well, right? We're talking about auroras. We might as well talk about things that happen when you launch a rocket into space as well.
Yeah.
So we've got some fun, and for us to get there, we're going to have to stay on time. So we're going to start off with exactly that. We're going to start off with the auroras, and this was something that you and I both, coincidentally, I think last week, were talking about the pictures of back on May and then October from the year prior. Mm-hmm. I was down in Florida at the time, and amazingly actually got to see the aurora down in Florida on both of those events. Mm-hmm. Now, it was through the phone. I couldn't see it with the naked eye, but I could see it on the phone, which certainly something I never thought would happen. And I think that's a big thing that's going on these days is everybody has a phone and everyone has night mode, which is why we're seeing these events is because we've got the ability to capture it with just a polarized camera, and we all have access to that now. So pretty cool. And we had a pretty unique event on Tuesday. Unfortunately, we kind of missed out on the Wednesday event. Didn't come in quite as strong. So if you missed the Tuesday event, you probably didn't see much on Wednesday. But we're going to break it down, how it happens, why we're seeing all of that type of activity, and maybe even talk about a little bit about an extreme event that thankfully we haven't seen, even a near miss, not too long in the distant past. But first, let's talk about what happened. And again, it was absolutely picturesque. So this is a picture from Weaverville, and you can see the reds there, the glowing purple as well, the nighttime sky. And as mentioned, Rachel and I both got outside.
We did. And it was funny because we both kind of started noticing it about the same time. And we were both, in different parts of Wake County going out and taking pictures and sort of experiencing it right about the time everyone else was. And to kind of get into this event a little bit, we knew that there was a G4, a level 4 out of 5 geomagnetic storm forecast, but all of the original forecasts were saying that it wasn't going to impact Earth until the middle of the day on Wednesday, which means most of us were not going to see the impacts in form of aurora because it was bright outside. But what ended up happening, so we're going to talk about CMEs here in just a moment. So, great transition. So what happened was, the sun is a very active star. We kind of forget about that because it's just kind of up there doing its thing, but it's very active, and we can get these CMEs, these coronal mass ejections, and basically someone described it to me once as, think of taking a scoop out of the sun and then throwing it at like 1,000,000 miles an hour toward the Earth. So it's basically a bunch of magnetized particles that are exploding off the sun and then racing toward Earth. They're really, really big, but it takes a long time typically for them to reach Earth. So normally a couple of days. So the Space Weather Prediction Center, often known as SWPC, they will monitor the sun. They will see these CMEs, these coronal mass ejections happening, and then they have to figure out how fast it's going and in what amount of time it is going to end up impacting the Earth. And so what happened is we had 3 happen in a fairly short amount of time, and then 2 ended up kind of combining and then hitting the Earth kind of as one bigger CME. And space weather forecasters were saying that when that hit the Earth, it was 8 to 10 times stronger than what you would typically experience. And it sped up because these two interacted with each other. They ended up speeding up a little bit and then hitting the Earth. And that's why we had the aurora show up kind of unexpectedly and as strong as it was, and we were able to see it here in North Carolina. So here's another way to look at it. Again, you have those charged particles, those magnetic particles, and they race toward the Earth. And again, it normally takes a couple of days, but those particles, they have their own magnetic field, and Earth obviously has its own magnetic field, and so you have magnetic fields that interact with each other. Some crazy things happen, and that's how we end up getting not just the aurora but also other impacts from geomagnetic storms. That is so challenging for me to say. Obviously most of the impacts that we see are in the form of the aurora. That's how you can actually see a lot of those particles sort of dancing and interacting with each other. But yeah, it's incredibly fascinating how these CMEs interact with Earth and how we end up getting what we're getting in the form of aurora or other geomagnetic storm impacts. And space weather is so complicated and so notoriously challenging to forecast. I mean, like, normal, they call it terrestrial weather, is challenging enough to forecast. But imagine having to try and track, one CME coming toward Earth, and then it interacts with another one, and it creates a magnetic field that's 8 to 10 times stronger than what you normally expect, and just slams into Earth ahead of schedule. It's fascinating and challenging all at the same time.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you're talking about basically a wave of particles that is traveling extremely fast that ejected from the sun. And keep in mind that we are orbiting the sun, so we are not a stationary point. So we are moving relative to the sun. So not a stationary point that gets ejected to us. As we're moving, they're trying to map out exactly where that CME is going to hit the Earth, how it's going to impact the Earth. And then imagine there being 2 or 3 impulses of CMEs that are moving toward Earth, like what we saw this past week. We actually saw 3 get ejected toward the Earth. And funny enough, when they first saw all 3, it looked like the third wave was going to be the strongest because it was the largest pulse and it was moving the fastest. So it looked like that was going to have the biggest impact. But as Rachel mentioned, 2 of those CMEs combined, and when you actually look at the graphic, it's crazy. They combined just before hitting the Earth.
Right before the Earth. And I think that's why there was that little bit of, I don't want to say uncertainty, but a little bit of surprise, so to speak, because, again, they forecast a G4 to impact Earth, but not until Wednesday, or the middle of the day on Wednesday. But because they interacted, like you said, right before impacting Earth, all of a sudden, I don't want to say it blew up, but,
Yeah, kind of did.
Kind of did.
Yeah, and crazy enough, if you're thinking, oh, well, man, we've seen a lot of activity as of late. Well, you're not wrong. We typically see these cycles peak every 11 years or so, and we're kind of on the tail end of that peak. So I'm not sure if you've mentioned it already. I might have just kind of started thinking ahead. But I don't know if you mentioned it already, but you actually had someone tell you that the potential to see it here in North Carolina was possible several years ago.
Several years ago, and I printed out all of the sound bites from that interview, and I forgot to grab it, but I was talking with an expert back in January of 2024 because there was a lot of talk about solar cycle 25 and how we were getting ready to reach the maximum intensity of solar cycle 25, which began in 2019, and as Ross mentioned, they're typically about 11 years in length, but the peak was expected to be around 2024, 2025. So in January of 2024, he told me I would not be surprised, or along the lines of, there's likely going to be multiple events where you will be able to see the aurora in North Carolina. January of 2024. What happened in May of 2024? We had that first big push of aurora that we ended up seeing here in North Carolina, and that was the one you saw in Florida, right?
Yep, May and October.
And then we had the October 2024 one as well, which was another one where we could see it here in North Carolina, and then we just had this one. So while space weather is incredibly complicated and so challenging to forecast, they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, they nailed that. That's crazy.
And I kind of forgot about that soundbite until I was going back and looking at it today, and I was like, holy cow. Like, I really wish I would have made a note of that back in January. Obviously I did, but I'm just like, wow, I wish I would have remembered him saying that.
Now, there's obviously other consequences to these
Right.
solar storms that happen because they are current that is charging the atmosphere.
Yeah.
That's why we get the lights, because those are particles that literally become charged because they're interacting with our magnetic field.
Right.
So that disrupts telecommunications. It can disrupt radio. It can disrupt GPS. And say in an event like back in 1859, far before we had, everyone had a cell phone, everyone was reliant on digital communication, we had a solar storm called the Carrington event. It was because the Carrington observer is the one that observed this, and that would have been a G5 KP9 event, which means it would have been the peak of the scale. That is the highest the scale goes.
Yeah, and I would just say briefly to talk about the K index, because we didn't really talk about that. So that's another way that space weather forecasters kind of show how strong geomagnetic storms can be. And so it goes from 1, technically the scale goes from 0 to 9. So that was a K12 that just shows you how strong it was. And for us in North Carolina, we typically have to have around a 7, but usually an 8 or a 9 for us to see the aurora. An 8 is normally about a G4. So you were talking about a K12 event. Technically, that's not even on the scale anymore. Just to show how strong that was. Sorry, I just felt like I had.
No, you're good. But in that event, there was telegraphs at the time, which basically crashed. The communications wouldn't work. Radio wasn't working. Telegraphs were actually able to be powered without power. So they were communicating from Boston to Portland, and there's actually a recorded conversation with telegraphs where they said, disconnect your battery. We're going to go off the battery power. And they responded and they said, yes, it's working better without the battery. So what they observed for 2 straight hours is that they were able to send telegraphs without power. So the charge that was coming from space powered the telegraphs better than the battery power that was supposed to power the telegraphs. So in today's world,
that's crazy.
If we had a Carrington event in today's world, it would basically crash everything. Computers, radios, GPS, all of that kind of stuff would basically go down. It would be an immediate blackout. So all of that,
terrifying to think about.
Yeah, that would crash everything. And coincidentally enough, in July of 2012, there was a Carrington-type wave observed, but it missed the Earth. And it only missed the Earth by about 9 days. So, again, remember, the Earth is moving. So that 9 days time travel is really not that far. So we were really, really close to having an observed Carrington-S type of wave affect the Earth. But didn't happen, thankfully. Yeah. And they say that only happens about once every 500 years. So,
and fortunately, we're nearing the tail end of solar cycle 25. So hopefully things are going to be a little less active from here on out.
Yeah, fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah.
So moving on to cold weather, and we had some cold weather to start off this week, and we talked about it a lot in the forecast going up to this colder air outbreak. We saw lows down into the 20s. RDU got all the way down to 30 degrees, and that was all thanks to really a whole lot of colder air being forced down, thanks to a big dip in the jet stream. So this was the polar jet diving way far south with a big high pressure system in control, and that helped to drive that colder air all the way to us. And that only lasted for a couple of days because now the jet has moved off to the east. We're starting to warm up, but there was some good consequences from this colder air other than killing off your summer plants and maybe needing to mulch some things down. Maybe got you in winter prep mode as well, which is a good thing because we could see some colder shots as we go throughout this winter, but it was the ski season started. Sugar Mountain, Cataloochee are both open at this point in time. Now, we do have a warmer period coming before we get to Thanksgiving, and then we might start to see some colder air come in and settle across the area as we go past Thanksgiving. That's kind of the way the pattern's breaking out. We'll have to wait and see on that. But Appalachian is looking like it should start November 21st, so not too far away. Beech Mountain all shortly will follow that as well, November 22nd, and Hatley Point coming in November 29th. So our ski season just around the corner. If you're like me and you like skiing, that certainly is something to look forward to, and certainly already something that people are taking advantage of. Now, I didn't get to take the day off to go enjoy the cold out there, but
me neither. We were here.
Yeah, you do what you can. I mean, when weather's active, that's when we're active, right? That's
Right.
when we're making our money. So
Yeah.
you do what you can. But there's other things that happen because of the cold and this time of year.
Oh, yeah. So maybe you've seen them as you've been driving around, whether back in your communities or on the interstate or the Beltline, anything like that. Have you noticed more deer, or at least a big sign on the interstate warning you that there could be more deer around? A lot of that is tied to the weather, of course, and our own meteorologist Matthew Huddleston explains a little bit more about that.
Drivers around central North Carolina always had to be on the lookout for deer when traveling around town, but collisions with them are more likely this time of year than at any other point of the calendar year. From October through December, crashes more than double for the rest of the year. 8,000 or more crashes in October, 13,000 or more crashes across the state in November, and 8,000 once again as we head towards the end of the year. That's all across the state, with November having the highest frequency, as I said, of that period. There are a number of factors leading to that November rise. This month is deer mating season, with peak deer migration also happening. Additionally, more vehicles are on the road around dawn and dusk due to daylight saving time ending in the earlier part of this month, and rush hours now coinciding with active deer times. But there are several steps you can take to make your commute the safest it can be. Look for reflective eyes from the deer down the road. Also reduce speed, especially in low light conditions and in areas with high deer populations. And as with any driving conditions, pay attention and have no distractions whatsoever on the road. Most importantly, if you spot a deer, you should brake, do not swerve. Trying to avoid a collision could cause a worse accident with another vehicle. Unfortunately, interactions with deer are nearly unavoidable, especially in rural areas. But they don't have to be deadly for the animals or drivers if you follow these important steps.
On the radar with the CBS 17 Storm Team.
Last we left you with the cold, and then Matthew explained the cold, and unfortunately this time of year, deer maybe running out in front of your car. So
Yeah.
never great. You were even telling me that you maybe have some practical experience with that.
Well, I have never hit a deer, but my dad, before he retired, worked as an insurance appraiser specifically for cars. And so he hated fall and winter because of all the deer running out and him having to go out and look at so many people's vehicles who hit deer. And then he also, on the side, he has a background in body work in terms of like fixing vehicles. So it was all the family friends, the church people, like, hey, you want to fix my car? So not only was he busy with his actual work, but his little side gig of fixing people's cars too. It felt like he was always extra busy as well. He's retired now, so he can spend a little more time fixing people's cars. But yeah, he very much hates this time of year for that reason.
Well, speaking of cold and things that you and I both enjoy, maybe not enjoy working in, but enjoy forecasting for. So
Yeah.
I like leading up to events, the forecast of snow and a forecast. And we even saw our first traces of snow across North Carolina.
Technically, a trace of snow was recorded at the airport with those snow flurries that fell as the cold air rushed in.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
know.
I even saw places like Elizabeth City, which is far closer to the coast,
Yeah.
recorded a half an inch of snow. So there was even places that saw some moderate burst of snow.
Yeah.
I know Monroe, just south of Charlotte, also recorded half an inch of snow from that little outburst. So when you have
Myrtle Beach reported some snow.
yeah. So when
Yeah.
you have a big cold upper level low working over the top of you, you can get some crazy things to happen.
Yeah.
And that nice little piece of energy helped us out for sure. So something that we talked about before, but maybe not hit a little more in detail, was lightning in winter. And the lore obviously is 2 weeks after lightning, you're going to get snow. At least that's the wives' tale, right?
Right.
But while that does have some meteorological backing, because typically when we see a cold front in winter, that typically means colder air.
Colder air, yeah, which creates the strong thunderstorms. And before our big cold snap, we had severe weather, especially, what was that, Saturday night into Sunday morning?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had severe weather. We had some strong thunderstorms move in. Now, obviously, it wasn't 2 weeks, and then we saw the snow, but
We
Yeah.
did have, that's right. So technically, we are 1 for 1 on, it's not winter yet, but
Not really.
technically
Yeah.
we're 1 for 1 on the winter-esque season where lightning and then followed, we had some snow recorded.
Right.
So maybe what I'm getting ready to say is just, oh, Ross doesn't know what he's talking about. We typically only see about 4 to 5 thunderstorms per winter. So it doesn't happen all that often. We don't typically have enough energy around to get lightning in winter. And we only average about 6 inches of snow per winter. So that means that only 13% of the time, going back over the last 10 years, did we actually see snow that happened after a lightning event that was recorded at the airport. So no, it doesn't look like that's the case. So maybe we just saw that part of that 10% out of that first event.
It's a happy little coincidence.
Happy little coincidence, exactly. I think that that's probably the case here, is that this is more or less just a coincidence where we had a nice strong cold front come through, and then we had a little piece of energy go on the backside of that. But honestly, I could foresee, now hold on to your hats here. We're getting ready to do our winter forecast. So Wes is going to have that coming out here in the next couple of weeks. We're going to have a whole winter special for you on that winter forecast. But maybe a little preview of that. This season could have more of those types of events where we get a strong cold front to come through. We get a little piece of energy to hang out in the backside, and we already have cold air in place. Well, we know that is a perfect recipe for a snowstorm here in North Carolina. So if you're a snow lover like myself, your fingers crossed that that setup repeats multiple times as we go throughout the winter, because we've already seen that setup through early portions of fall. If we had that in January, we would have been talking about some significant snowstorms, the nor'easter that unfortunately did damage out on the beach, and then shortly following the nor'easter, the secondary low that went off to our south and tracked up the coast that helped bring us some beneficial rainfall. We were on the cold side of that low, so that would have been a snowstorm had that been in January and we had cold air already in place. So
And that's normally the best setup for us to get any sort of snow, whether it's significant or just a little bit of a dusting. We have to have that low going up along the coast to bring us in a little moisture, but also to be able to tap into the cold weather. So, and even if we end up having a slightly warmer than average winter, if we have one big cold snap, sometimes it's all you need.
Yeah, and Wes was telling me a couple weeks ago that our winters are typically forecasted around whatever oscillation is happening in the Pacific. So El Nino, neutral year, or La Nina. This winter is actually going to be a La Nina. And if you're wondering if that affects our average snowfall, the answer is no.
Not really,
And all three types of oscillations, our average snowfall ends up being right around 6 inches. So we kind of see the same type of winter play out regardless of whatever oscillation or pattern is playing out. And it's exactly because of that. All we need is one storm to work on the backside of a cold air mass up the coast, and voila, we're probably going to hit our average or even be above average. And if you go back to January of 2000, that's when we set the record here. And this is an astronomical number. 25.5 inches of snow. That is huge, even for
I say for anywhere
any
in the
area.
country, that's a lot of snow.
But
Central North Carolina, 25 inches of snow?
2 feet? Sure. Yeah, I mean, can you imagine that forecast being like, hey, we got 2 feet of snow coming? Everybody
And people
would
would
be
have been like, wait, feet or inches? And they're like, no, feet. I'm like, what?
people would not believe you. They'd be like, no, this is Central North Carolina. We're not
Right.
going to get
That
2
just
feet of
doesn't
snow.
happen.
That doesn't sound
Yeah.
right. And I can only imagine what forecasters in 2000 had to go through with that system.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up in North Carolina, so I remember that snowstorm in the Piedmont.
Really?
I do. We got 16 inches in the Piedmont, so I remember that. We had an ice storm that year as well, so that
Okay.
was a pretty severe winter,
Jeez.
the year of 2000, and we had one of the worst ice storms we've ever had in 2002. So that couple 3-year period there, that's why this guy is a winter weather lover, is because I grew up and we had some absolute awesome winter storms. So that's probably part of why I've got the meteorological bug inside of me,
Probably.
is because of those storms when I was
Yeah.
in what would have been middle school at that point in time. So so I love snow, but we're going to transition away from the snow and the winter weather talk, and we're going to talk about space weather once again. The anniversary. Oh, nope, actually, I
It's
did
our
it again.
earliest snow.
Our earliest
19
snow, yeah.
1903.
I meant to throw these graphics up while we were still talking about the snow, but we have shown this before. So 1903, we did have a setup. We're in October 24th. We saw snow. And if you're wondering when the other early season snows happened, about October 31st, 1887. I guess, are technically now on this list with November 11th? No, November 10th.
10th.
November 10th. So not quite on
We're
this
pretty
list.
close.
Pretty close. So we'd have a trace of snow
It all
there.
kind of lines up sort of end of October, early November, typically when we get that first real push of cold air. Even if it's just brief, it kind of can create something.
Check mark on that. And if you're wondering if this is any indicator of the rest of the season, the answer is absolutely not. There is no correlation to early season cold and how the rest of the season is going to go. But to promise you, we are now going to transition back to some space weather. And this is pretty cool. This is anniversary of the Apollo 12 lightning strike that hit the Saturn V rocket on the 1969 mission to the moon. And to their mission specifically was to go to the lunar landing material that was up there. It was kind of a dead robot at that point in time, and they were trying to collect those samples from it, get back onto the rocket, and then come back to Earth. And lightning struck the rocket as it was on launch. So this is really, a kind of a crazy event, and probably set up some of the safety features that are in place now. You can see that the rocket was not struck by lightning until after the rocket took off. And Rachel, why is that?
Yeah, so a lot of times there can just be some lingering static in the atmosphere, even if there's not an active thunderstorm around. And I believe there was some rain around at this point, but not an active thunderstorm. So that charge can sort of be activated as the rocket is launching, because even if there's not an active thunderstorm, if there's just enough charge or just enough sort of static electricity around, not just the atmosphere but lingering in that cloud, sometimes that's all it takes is just that rocket launching. Now we have a lot better forecasting procedures. Actually, a part of the U.S. Space Force is the 45th Weather Squadron, and they are in charge of doing all of the forecasting for launch weather, specifically in Cape Canaveral, Florida. And lightning is included as part of their probability of violation, or POV. And they used to call it the anvil rule. I think they call it something different now. But basically, even if there's not an active thunderstorm going on, but there was maybe remnants of a thunderstorm, like an orphan anvil, which is when a storm has dissipated, but the top of the cloud is still there. If that is still there within a certain radius of the launch pad, they scrub the launch because they don't want to risk something like this happening, where that little bit of charge that's still hanging on is attracted to the rocket, and we then have a lightning strike.
Yeah, you're exactly
the
right.
rocket.
There was no lightning that was happening when this launch took place. There was a charge in the atmosphere, and that's observed, but there was no lightning happening, and they did have some rain falling. Basically, the rocket took off. It charged the particles, kind of like what we were talking about with the space stuff coming on, but in this case, happening in the troposphere, so at the surface, and that helped to create the lightning that then struck the rocket. Now, thankfully, thanks to some really smart astronauts, as well as Houston and Cape Canaveral, they were able to figure it out, salvage the mission, and the mission was successful. So they got back to Earth. They recovered the materials off the moon, but they lost a lot of equipment inside the rocket when they got charged. I read a quote that was the head of that mission, and he said it was an extremely normal mission for about 36 seconds. And then after that, they had to go through all kinds of crazy stuff to get everything circuited around, because they lost a bunch of voltage, they lost a bunch of meters, they lost a bunch of that kind of stuff. So lightning hitting a rocket, not a good thing, especially when you're in space, and basically anything in space can kill you. So you want everything functioning exactly the way it's supposed to, not losing a bunch of equipment. So kind of crazy that they were able to salvage that mission after that took place, and it didn't end up being a fatal mission after being struck by lightning. So that's why all those safety features are there. So we started with space, we ended with space,
and they also have things in place for that forecast for space weather, solar flares, CMEs, all of that, because obviously that can disrupt the atmosphere as well, and that can disrupt rockets and satellites and everything in space. So yes, we have officially come full circle.
We've come full circle. And with that, we're going to close out this week's of On the Radar. So make sure to catch up on the latest. You can do that on CBS17.com, or you can check us out on the Roku Plus app, as well as on YouTube on CBS 17 channel there as well. So check out all of that stuff. Rachel and I have some great segments on that. So if you missed out, go back and watch it. If not, you could just be entertained by our witty banter because we think we're funny. We think we're funny.
We're probably the only ones who think we're funny.
Yeah, probably. Well, that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for watching.